As Amy introduced me, my name is Ryan Cagle. I hail from the backwoods of Alabama, or more specifically from the Blackwater River watershed on the unceded land of the Muskogee Creek peoples, a land flowing with mosquitoes and honeysuckle. And I am the communications director here at Grace, as you all know now, if you didn't, which means I'm the person who designed the bulletins that you are using for this service, sending you emails multiple times a week, scheduling social media messages and posts, amongst many other things. All of that is to say, unless you found a typo tonight, and then it was some other redneck from some other southern state, and not me. As you can tell, I got a bit of an accent. I mask it well a lot of times, at least in my mind, but if something I say isn't clear, please just raise your hand. I'll enunciate better. Being the resident communications hillbilly for Grace, I am when I'm not doing those things, I'm also a husband to my spouse, my high school sweetheart of 12 years come April. I'm the father of 2 feral children, a grad student studying the intersections of faith formation, regenerative farming, eco-theology, and food sovereignty, as well as being a community organizer, what's the word we use instead of pastor, at a church called Jubilee House, which I'm really excited to talk to you more about Sunday after 10 a.m. worship service. All right, enough about me. As you know, this is my first time here in person at Grace, and I cannot truly express how thankful I am for the opportunity to be with all of you. Like Peter on Mount Tabor, I cannot help but think it is good for us to be here. It is good for me to be here, especially. To be in the presence of one another to be here in the presence of one another and the inexhaustible mystery and limitless love of God is a good thing. And you do not know how much Peter's words resonate with me today. I was quite unsure that I would be with you today, even though we've had this scheduled for months. See, Ash Wednesday came really early for my home of Walker County. I somehow found myself cast headfirst into the throes of a Lenten season I had no intentions on observing. Jubilee House is not Episcopalian. We don't do Ash Wednesday or Lent very much. And I shared with the staff that I probably wasn't going to observe Lent this year. But last week got sideways. News broke in my community about a death of an inmate who was there after a wellness check. A death that our county sheriff's department tried to cover up. My community is in turmoil. A young, very unwell man has died at the hands of police brutality and decades long of corruption. Lent came to my front door, whether I liked it or not. Tony Anthony Mitchell suffered 2 weeks ago, and I know you don't know who he is, but I have to say his name. He was a young man, an addict, much like my father and my brothers, much like my niece, who was experiencing a lot of hurt and pain and trauma around the death of his father, and he needed help, and our community failed him, and his life was snuffed out. And now so many in our community are hurting and experiencing firsthand what it means, this death, this mortality, this end of life. Saturday, I participated and ended up the face of a protest to get our sheriff removed. And we've expected a lot of backlash from that, which is why I did not think I would be here today. And thank goodness that that is not the case, because you have no idea how much I needed to be here today with you, especially after last week. So as Peter said, it is a good thing for us to be here today. Needless to say, this feels like the ashiest of Ash Wednesdays I think I've ever experienced. My heart is broken and my bones are still reeling from rage. I got all my screaming out Saturday, so you don't have to worry about that. I'm thankful to be here, to be able to share this space with you, and honestly, I couldn't have picked a better day in our liturgical year to be asked to preach. I've been accused on more than one occasion to be a little too heavy on the existentialism. I think being an Enneagram 4, the whole brooding death, that thing is just something that's always at the forefront of my mind anyway. The truth is, though, that the reason this is so important to me this day is that the text, Isaiah 55 and 2 Corinthians, are very dear to my heart, particularly 2 Corinthians. I would say it's my life verse, and I don't mean that so much in a positive sense, but rather as an accurate summation of my lived experience. Y'all ain't Pentecostal like me, so I will spare you the full testimony, but if I had $1 for every time I heard the Holy Ghost whisper in my ear, through hardships, through labors, through hunger and sleepless nights, in honor and dishonor, as having nothing and yet possessing everything, I don't know that I would accurately fit the description of someone who can relate to the verse. This is not to say that I'm an exemplar of the positive aspects of the text that give our brother Paul all the reason to boast in the Lord, but what I'm trying to say is that the Holy Ghost seems to remind me regularly that it is this place of struggle between sorrow and joy, between the valley and the mountaintop, and between life and death that grace abounds all the more. Like Peter, we have not gotten any answers like we learned about on last Sunday in last Sunday's lectionary reading. He stood in the presence of the transfiguration of Jesus and said, "It is good for us to be here." He asked to make dwellings, and God and Moses, Jesus, they don't respond with anything that makes any sense to him. They just say, God, the voice of God says, "This is my son in whom I am well pleased." So Peter doesn't get any answers, and we don't get any answers, but good news is we get Jesus. We get presence. We get community. We get the Holy Ghost here with us right now. And so I've been to the mountaintop, I would say. I've seen the glory of the Lord. And I know that despite all the pain and difficulty, that somehow the Spirit finds a way. Resurrection happens after Good Friday. We just got to get there first. Power gets made perfect in weakness. So I kept coming back to this week, this question, when we were conversing at church. It's like, have you seen the glory of the Lord? So I ask you, have you seen the glory of the Lord? But before you answer, I know you have, because you were here last week, right? Like good and faithful Episcopalians. You heard all about Mount Tabor and the Transfiguration. But the thing is about last week, if you were here, you didn't just get to come up one mountaintop, you got to come up two. Because we heard about Mount Sinai and Mount Tabor. The lectionary readings, we heard about Moses climbing to the top of Mount Sinai and Jesus carrying Peter, James, and John up to the top of Mount Tabor. The first depicts the giving of the law to Israel, in which Sinai was literally aflame with the glory of God. The second depicts the transfiguration of Jesus, which was the presence of God was so stout there in that moment that Peter, James, and John found themselves face first on the ground, terrified. So we've been to two mountaintops, both aflame with the glory of God, both awful and wondrous, simultaneously awe-inspiring and terrifying. But tonight, on this Ash Wednesday, we've come back to the valley. Me, literally, first time. We have made the long and arduous journey back down from the inexplicable glories where heaven and earth collide, back down to the valley to face our mortality, knowing what is ahead of us. That is to say, another mountaintop altogether, actually. No less bursting at the seams with the inexhaustible mystery and the limitless love of God, and no less awful and perplexing than the two before it, but a different mountaintop nonetheless. Today we begin our Lenten journey together here at Grace, and with the Western Church the world over, we are embarking on a pilgrimage that ends on Good Friday atop Golgotha's summit. Tabor behind us, and Golgotha in front of us. We're not there yet, and thank goodness, because if I'm being honest, I'm not even ready to be in the Valley of Lent. Like Peter, I would much prefer to have pitched my tent atop Mount Tabor last week and stayed there. Unfortunately, that is not the way that it is with mountaintops. Eventually, we have to come back down. Sometimes it's by choice, and sometimes it's because we have no other choice. There's stuff to do, bills to pay, jobs to go to, planes to catch, kids to feed. There are poor to be clothed, sick to be healed, captives to be set free. The transfiguration is behind us, and the crucifixion may lie just ahead of us, but there is so much here and now between these two mountains, between these two moments, and the tension between sorrow and joy and life and death that needs our attention. In thinking about this Lenten season, I have asked myself, what is it I will choose to fast now that I'm already here? It's a question I ignored early on. But as we heard from the prophet Isaiah tonight, what we choose, that question, will it also be what God chooses? What fast will we take on this Lent, and will it be one that God approves of? To what end are we striving and longing? And is that direction also the direction God is heading? What dreams are we dreaming? Liberation theologian Dorothy Soleil once said, God dreams us, and we should not let God dream alone. And here at Grace, we are inviting you to dream this Lenten season. To dream together, to dream with God, to open our eyes and ears and hearts to the Spirit of a living God who is inviting us into the messiness of life, into full humanity, into the struggle of living and dying, to labor for justice and beauty, to love our neighbors, to believe a different world is possible, and that death is not the end. But is that true? Because if we look around, there are wars, there's rumors of wars. The world seems to be racing to see who can get the highest body count. Police brutality, climate catastrophe, the list goes on and on. It can seem as though sometimes in the dark of night, morning never comes. And then in the end, the universe is just cold and indifferent. Sometimes people we love die. Sometimes we work our fingers to the bone and don't get the promotion we thought we needed. Sometimes we get bad reports from the doctor. Sometimes we lose what we thought we could not live without. Sometimes our lives fall apart. We lose our home, our jobs. The bills keep coming. There are not enough hours in the day. We lose sleep. We have panic attacks. We dread waking up in the morning. And the list goes on and on. Because what the news has to offer us is not much better than what's inside of us. Sometimes it's all just too much to deal with. Today we remember our deaths. But if we look around and see that death seems to just continue to abound. I can't seem to shake the words of Flannery O'Connor when she said, what people don't realize is how much religion costs. They think faith is a big electric blanket, when of course it is the cross. As much as I wish she was wrong, I cannot help but think Ash Wednesday comes to remind us of this truth. Death comes to every one of our doors, whether we like it or not, and I don't say that flippantly. It is a cycle of life, after all, that things must die so others can live. Things must come to an end so others can begin. We must leave mountaintops for the valley. Transfiguration, crucifixion, resurrection, rewind, repeat, over and over again, until we learn to love our neighbors at a cost, to risk an act of love for the poor, the hungry, the mentally ill, the sick, the alone, the forgotten, and the oppressed. Rewind, repeat, over and over again as we learn to be fully alive until nothing in us remains untouched by the transfiguring love of God. I cannot help but think this is what it means to be born again. To find ourselves carried by the grace in the midst of this constant cycle of life and death. To follow Jesus into the wilderness, to bear the weight of endings so we can know true beginnings. To be like those regarded as dying, and yet look, somehow we still live. To struggle for justice and freedom and healing in a world hell-bent on destruction. It's no wonder why we want to stay on the mountaintop. It's easy to ignore all the death and the injustice in the world around us when we are insulated with an electric blanket faith. But maybe there's more to this whole from dust you came and to dust you will return anyway. Maybe for every Mount Tabor in our life there's indeed a Golgotha, but maybe, just maybe, for every crucifixion there's also a transfiguration on the other side. As we heard from the prophet Isaiah, maybe in some way, Ash Wednesday is a reminder that there may not be justice, but there is just us here in the messiness in the thick of a broken world, desperate for the love of God. Maybe it's a reminder to embrace the love and simultaneously our mortality. Maybe it's an invitation to come down from the mountaintop, telling the world about what has been transfigured in us. And as we begin this journey of dreaming together this year, may we be so bold to ask God, what fast is it that you have chosen for us? But don't worry, the prophet Isaiah already answered it for you. Is such the fast that I choose, a day to humble oneself? Is it to bow down the head like a bulrush and lie in sackcloth and ashes? Will you call this a fast? A day acceptable to the Lord? Is not the fast that I choose to loose the bonds of injustice, to undo the thongs of the yoke, to let the oppressed go free, and break every yoke? Thank you.